Hello everyone, my name is Benosaurus, but you can call me Ben. Today, I'm going to be looking at two of my favourite franchises of all time, Portal and Half-Life. And I'm going to be taking an in-depth look at how both franchises, developed by Valve, have incorporated both sound and the overall environment to tell a story through the use of in-game storytelling, and provides just enough information to the player unconsciously to help incorporate ideas, whether that's gameplay mechanics or just the overall sense of what is happening. For this, I'm going to be looking at both the first games of their respective franchises overall, but if needed I shall reference any key points to help solidify my opinion within the other games of the franchises, so like Portal 2, Gearbox's Half-Life expansions, Half-Life 2 and its episodes, and of course Half-Life Alyx. To help explore my point, I'm going to be looking at two theories that I believe are going to be perfect for me for examining this topic. The theories in question are ludology and narratology. Through incorporating world building through sound and in-game storytelling, we're providing players with decisions that make them feel like they took control of a situation even though it was a hidden tutorial created by the developers, and in this case it's Valve. Before, however, we jump into the portal of either the portal gun or Zen, depending on your preference, I think it's important to stress what both theories mean to individuals who may not know. Scholars state that ludology is the product of the relations between the concepts of rules and mechanics, seen to take priority over its narratological distinctions. They also state how it's developed as a discipline that observes the universal systemization of the factors involved in video games, be it in the more general concepts. The second theory, narratology, is described overall as a paradigm shift, the structured elements and relations that bind cinematic units together to form a superstructure of meaning. Given how games remain a process that unfolds from a core structure of rules, structuralism made the connection between game and narrative more visible. This is important to look at and discuss because video games establish a special connection with players for allowing them to meaningfully engage with the game, even while refusing to imagine the world that the game projects. The rules of a game are often sufficient to keep the player's interest. With both theories now described, let us now jump straight into how both Half-Life and Portal use these theories to their advantage to create more compelling and engaging storylines through player creativity from both a story and gameplay perspective, by taking advantage of mechanics like sound design through music and dialogue, while also giving the player the illusion that they're in control when in reality, the developers have constructed the levels to provide this narrative towards the player, to help them easily digest the game well and help proceed through the game at their own pace. Half-Life 1 was and still is an absolute masterpiece, developed by a little known company you may have heard of, Valve, who only created Steam. Yeah, I would also be surprised if you have heard of them before as well. But in all seriousness, Valve is fantastic when it comes to its narrative design. This all began when Half-Life was finally introduced and released to the public in 1998 to immediate critical acclaim. So, how does the game that became so influential within the FPS genre start? With guns blazing? What about explosions or being attacked by a helicopter? No, don't be silly. The true action is all about patiently waiting on a train ride. Just a simple day at work at a secret hidden facility named
Black Mesa.
Truly action-packed, that will get anyone's blood pumping, like the Doom soundtrack when a battle starts. The start of Half-Life though is actually quite significant because it helps enhance our sense of immersion within a familiar world or communicate a fresh perspective on that story through the altering of established details. The feeling of immersion is shown through seeing different aspects of the facility. It makes you feel part of the protagonist going through their daily journey to work. As the game progresses, you accidentally cause a resonance crusade that, just opens a dimensional split between Earth and the border world of Zen. Just a casual Friday night, I guess. This is where the game really kicks off and cleverly allows the player to explore and play through the game, while providing them potential possibilities that make the player think they came up with the ideas when it was the developers cleverly implementing mechanics to show players what they can do, as I've stated a fair few times already. Half-Life does this well when it pushes its ludic mechanics as they help the player actually feel the themes of the game being expressed through mechanics. This is done once you get up from the lift and encounter a security guard with a scientist who has been zombified through one of the creatures in Zen, called a headcrab. The game will give the player possibilities to think of multiple methods at this moment. Should you let the security guard kill the zombie and provide you with an ally that can be used to unlock secret areas that are scattered across the facility that only they can access and open? Or should you just let the guard die, pick up the pistol, and continue the journey on your own? Decisions like this give the players the feeling of ludic ferocis, which is simply allowing players to guide decision-making processes based on moral arguments In the context of game experiences, when confronted with a decision like this between the life or death of an NPC, some players may feel bad for letting them die. Others may regret it once they realise that they have a purpose to access inaccessible areas, while the majority may just let them die, so they can just get a pistol early. The principle here is heavily implying that players to be morally invested in the decisions made, and that they must reflect upon the meaning of the choices they are given. It doesn't only affect the moment of choice, but also the general sequence and meaning of play. By introducing the player to such an important mechanic regarding allies, and how they attack enemies, it shows the player the potential they may have, and how the AI operate within a scenario, and the benefits it may have to the player to keep them alive. This technique immediately makes this rule surrounding protecting them clear, and with it, an introductional fact has come about. This continuum from free playing to structured playing is a way to conceptualize the connection between the two. This method is essentially giving the player a tutorial without them being confined to an actual tutorial, and instead it makes the player think of what to do next, without actually being directly told by a button prompt or a text bubble, that bloody press A to jump. Instead, the player feels that they have complete control and freedom over how they will act upon this situation, and Half-Life does this very well throughout the overall experience of the game, letting the player feel sympathetic or vicious towards the other survivors of the Black Mesa incident brings a whole new level of immersion to you. It makes you feel part of the world and what you would do if you were ever in a similar situation, and how you would adapt to the sudden drastic change where your world is completely flipped on the script. I mean, for me, I'd just cry, hide in a trash can, eat Ben & Jerry's and just accept the fate. But this identification with the character provides perspective that player immersion in the game world derives from the player becoming the game character, in the sense of the player having the experience of acting within the game world. This is why the introduction to Half-Life is so important. You get details about the protagonist like their name, age and occupation. You get to discover what their qualifications are and where they're working. Valve are humanising the character to make you feel close and have a personal connection to the protagonist. You feel more surprised when things turn to shit. You may have even gained more sympathy from going past dead or turned scientists. You may start questioning yourself on whether you should help them or not, to potentially gain better equipment to improve your chances of survival. This one event is done through an evocative space, which is essentially invoking a pre-existing narrative association and helps build the foundation for the rest of the game, with how players should engage with characters like the security guards and scientists. But Valve cleverly twists this formula, where the protagonist discovers that there's been a military task force called in to kill everyone in the facility. This turns the table because you've gone from killing creatures from another dimension to now having to kill other people. The lines have been blurred in what's right or wrong to kill, and the plot twist was something that genuinely surprised me first time playing. Ludology plays a massive part in this because it now acknowledges the need to understand cognitive, emotion and goal-oriented behaviour of players from a psychological perspective by establishing more vigorous methodologies. Your task as Gordon Freeman has changed from this point on. It is now simply to just survive and escape Black Mesa, no matter the cost. So, how does Portal do it? Portal hasn't been discussed much until now, and I wanted to try and break down each game separately with their own relevant points towards the theories that I felt best matched each game title. Therefore, let me just give a very quick summary of Portal to those who may not know. Portal 1 was a surprise package alongside Valve's big hitters Half-Life 2 Episode 2 and Team Fortress 2, as it was included in Valve's The Orange Book. Players quickly fell in love with Portal's unique design and twists through clever puzzles and mechanics. However, one thing that I have always personally appreciated is Portal's sound design that best conveys a story all on its own. It makes the player begin thinking about the what-ifs. A good example is the introduction when you wake up. You get a feeling of your surroundings while enclosed in a small space with nowhere to go. All you see is your bed, toilet, desk, radio, some clipboards and an observation room. The room looks tidy and clean, and so does the space you currently occupy. Then suddenly, you hear a voice.
Hello, and again, welcome to the Aperture Science Computer Aided Enrichment Center.
Everything is fine until a few seconds have passed when the voice suddenly breaks down. The lights go dim, and the player may immediately feel uncomfortable and begin pondering questions about what happened and why they happened.
If you have others, please refrain from... Turn back.
These questions only begin to rise when you realise the dialogue is constantly being cut off.
Do not look directly at the operational end of the device. Do not submerge the device in liquid, even partially. Most importantly, under no circumstances should you...
then another question begins to creep through a player's mind. Am I alone? Portal does this well, where it makes the player feel alone without directly making them feel this. It's a clever use of in-game storytelling because it makes the player get to experience the story themselves instead of it being told secondhand, and it also maintains the player's immersion in the game world. Things like the observation rooms make the player start to ponder after they've completed a few chambers. Why are there so many, but no one is ever in them?
These frosted glass observation rooms make the player feel as if they're being watched at all times, while keeping the identity of these watchers a mystery.
But surely someone is here because the cameras are constantly monitoring and following, right? But all you hear is the voice of one person, an AI who seems to break and crash now and then. These questions get pushed when the player is introduced to the Ratman dens that are scattered across the facility. It shows you a different side of Aperture Laboratories. The aesthetic goes from clean, nice and tidy, to broken, seemingly abandoned, torn down like no one has been in the facility in years, and that the individual who has designed these chambers are struggling mentally, that they must have been alone for a long time to become to the point of being obsessed over a pink cube. Valve has incorporated the ideology of letting the player attempt to fill in the gaps and create their own story of what has happened before they eventually get informed. As the story grows and changes in our minds, we also must act. The choices a player must make as they decipher the game's clues, often unconsciously filling in the gaps, our sense of what we think we must do within the game. The music in the game helps provide a sense of uncomfortableness to the player, while admittedly also performing a form of comfort because of the fact that it is a different sound being introduced. The way that the music is presented at its tempo and rhythm helps incorporate the idea, though, to the player musically, that they are alone, almost that all hope has been abandoned for our protagonist. Music appears to increase immersion, which reduces tension and negative effect at the expense of a deduction in the experience of flow within gameplay. The original Portal is ambient aside from the occasional buzz playing, but when the music gets introduced in particular chambers, it breaks the awkward silence that is provided and makes the player feel connected, due to sound playing a part in the game's perceptual realism that forms a basis for player immersion. Finally, the last point I really want to mention about sound is the dialogue. A prime example is towards the end of Portal, when GLaDOS begins talking to you. She states one line of interest regarding what is going on beyond Aperture, and how she sounds nervous when she mentions them.
Are you trying to escape? Things have changed since the last time you left the building. What's going on out there will make you wish you were back in here. I have an infinite capacity for knowledge, and even I'm not sure what's going on outside. All I know is I'm the only thing standing between us and them.
The stakes for players' involvement, interpretation, and therefore attention is much higher in games, so they listen more actively and employ different modes of listening to guide their own movements and actions in the game. When listening to GLaDOS' dialogue throughout the game, it helps construct ideas about her character and how barbaric she has become, when you realise that she's killed everyone within the facility. But this mention of them, it puts the player off, because she sounds genuinely unsure and possibly worried of what there is potentially out there, and how she's been making sure that they don't enter the facility. This clever use of in-game storytelling leads me to my truly final point surrounding the topic overall. And that's how Valve has cleverly indicated that both franchises are part of the same universe. Now, that may have just been because Portal borrowed some Half-Life 2 assets and some people noticed, but truly, it's also there to see for the player themselves. One of these examples to show that both universes are connected, aside from the obvious assets share, is that in Portal, when you are attempting to escape GLaDOS once you discover that she wants to kill you, after promising cake throughout the whole bloody game, you will see a projector displaying information about Black Mesa and Aperture, and their rivalry between the two companies. And this gets extended actually in both franchises, in particular in Half-Life 2 Episode 2 and Portal 2. In Half-Life 2 Episode 2, you get a brief appearance from the infamous
Borealis!
that has the Aperture Science logo plastered on it on a container.
Good God.
Incredible!
What? The Borealis? It's real?
Oh yes, quite real, despite its almost legendary stature. Our peers at Aperture Science were at work on a project of some promise, but in their rush to beat Black Mesa for funding, they must have compromised ordinary standards of risk. We heard their research vessel had simply disappeared, vanished, with all hands, and even part of the dry dock.
Now in Portal 2, when you're going through the depths of Aperture, you can encounter an empty dry docking bay, where the famous ship was laid before it teleported away. So, important note, it's been a day since I said the script, but I noticed this when editing it back. It's kind of interesting to see the difference of how Aperture has gone really downhill, particularly with this line, that the vengeance that Cave has with Black Mesa.
Greetings, friend. I'm Cave Johnson, CEO of Aperture Science. You might know us as a vital participant in the 1968 Senate hearings on missing astronauts. And you've most likely used one of the many products we invented, but that other people have somehow managed to steal from us. Black Mesa can eat my bankrupt...
It's kind of interesting, because when you first go in the depths of Aperture, you'll hear Cave talking about, like, astronauts and Olympians leaving in limos. Like, it really seems like Aperture is, like, really high and mighty, that what they're doing is amazing and fantastic, and they're really on it, and that their future is secure and safe.
Welcome, gentlemen, to Aperture Science. Astronauts, war heroes, Olympians, you're here because we want the best, and you are it. So, who is ready to make some science? Now, you already met one another on the limo ride over.
But by this point, when you get to this part of the game, Cave's talking about getting people from a park bench, doing tests for 60 quid.
Now you might be asking yourself, Cave, just how difficult are these tests? What was in that phone book of a contract I signed? Am I in danger? Let me answer those questions with a question. Who wants to make $60? Cash. You can also feel free to relax for up to 20 minutes in the waiting room, which is a damn sight more comfortable than the park benches most of you were sleeping on when we found you.
You also get a bit of backstory as well when Cave mentions about the missing astronauts. It really summarizes how much Aperture has changed, and even like the overall environment's changed as well, from like nice marble to like more cheaper material, and it summarizes how Aperture has really fallen and how Black Mesa's really like taking charge, and that their laboratories is becoming a lot more better and a lot more sufficient and efficient for things like the government, and it really shows when Aperture is starting to go a little bit downhill from astronauts to homeless people, essentially. Both encounters are clever ploys in feeling the games connect, and for fans of both franchises to feel truly immersed in the universe, while encouraging fans of either Half-Life or Portal to try the other game out due to the connections they share. Games are shown to be stories in a well-argued and defined way. And in conclusion, Valve has managed to smartly use both sound and the effects of in-game storytelling to help construct a method of play for players to understand the mechanics, but to also connect dots or parts of the jigsaw puzzle for them to feel even more part of the in-game world, and to feel like they are truly seeing the game through their respective protagonists' eyes, whether that's Shell or Gordon.
Oh, excuse me if I'm interrupting tea time. I'll just step out until you've finished, if that's more convenient.
These techniques show how both sound design and in-game storytelling can be used to effectively build on how the strategies produce a detailed story for the players to explore, visit, and discover for themselves through their respective playthroughs. Thank you so much for watching, take care, and I shall see you on the other side of the portal.